The first time Daniel ever felt watched in those woods, he thought it was just the wind. Just that familiar childhood paranoia returning to him after years away from his hometown. The leaves rustled in soft, uneven waves, like something tall drifted between the trees. But the forest behind his parents' old house had always been strange like that, always humming quietly with its own breath, its own pulse. He tried to tell himself nothing had changed, but it had. He had changed, for one. He wasn't the fearless 12-year-old who used to run between the pines with muddy shoes and a backpack full of snacks. He wasn't the boy who used to swear he saw something white, impossibly tall, standing beyond the tree line near dusk. Back then, every kid in that neighborhood whispered the same name, with a mix of fascination and dread. A name they heard from older cousins or online forums or campfire dares. They said he lived in the forest. They said he watched children who wandered too far. They said he didn't like to be seen. But Daniel had grown up. He moved away, built a life far from that forest, far from the nightmares that crawled out from it. He had almost succeeded in forgetting. Almost. He never expected to return, not unless forced to. And that force came in the form of a phone call from his mother. Quiet, trembling, her voice sounding smaller than he remembered. "Your father isn't doing well. He keeps wandering toward the woods at night. Please come home, just for a while." So he packed what little he could and drove hours back to the house he once swore he'd never live in again. He expected discomfort. He expected memories. He even expected the occasional phantom fear triggered by old stories from childhood. He did not expect to find his father staring at the tree line from the kitchen window, eyes unfocused and unblinking, as though waiting for something or someone to step out of the darkness. Daniel called his name. Once. Twice. His father didn't blink, didn't turn, didn't react at all until Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. And even then, the flinch was violent, an instinctive recoil like an animal cornered by an unseen predator. "I thought you saw him," his father whispered, his voice hoarse and strangled. Daniel didn't ask who. He already knew. He tried to laugh it off, tried to reassure his father that nothing lived in those woods except squirrels and old deer trails. But the words felt thin, fragile like tissue paper stretched over a secret no one in this house dared to name aloud. That night, the tapping began. Soft, rhythmic, from the bedroom window. At first, he thought it was branches swaying in the wind. The house sat close to the tree line, too close, in his opinion, and the forest had always felt like it was leaning in, looming over the roof like a curious giant. But the tapping wasn't random. It wasn't natural. It came in twos, then fours, then twos again. Like someone knocking. He didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't look toward the window. Because suddenly he wasn't 12 years old anymore, but he felt like it. The fear was the same. The pressure in the room was the same. The sense of being observed was exactly the same. He told himself not to turn his head. Do not look. Do not look out the window. Nothing is there. But his body didn't listen. He turned. Slowly. Too slowly. The window was dark, reflecting only the shape of his room. But behind that faint reflection, behind the dim outline of his own eyes, something tall stood at the edge of the yard. A white, vertical shape, motionless. Watching. His breath caught, his chest tightened painfully. He felt the old nightmarish paralysis rooting him in place. He blinked hard. Gone. The yard was empty. His reflection was alone. He told himself he imagined it, that stress and exhaustion were twisting shadows into monsters, but the tapping returned as soon as he lay back down. This time, from the far wall. Not the window, the wall. The side of the house that faced directly into the forest. He didn't sleep. By morning, the tapping had stopped, and he convinced himself it had been mice or pipes cooling, or anything else that didn't involve faceless silhouettes watching him from the tree line. He needed air, fresh air, clear thoughts, so he stepped outside. And that was when he saw the footprints. Not from boots, not from shoes. Long, thin, as though something incredibly tall had stepped forward and pressed its shape into the mud. 2 prints, facing the house, leading nowhere, beginning at empty forest, ending right at the wall where he'd heard the tapping. He felt cold, deep, bone-deep cold. His mother stepped out behind him, carrying a mug of coffee, and saw the footprints too. Her face drained of color. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her silence told him everything. The house had been like this for months. The forest had been active, and whatever had started with his father hadn't stopped. Dinner that evening was tense. His father barely ate, barely spoke, gaze drifting constantly toward the back window as if compelled by an invisible force. His mother tried to maintain the illusion of normalcy, asking Daniel about his life in the city, his work, his plans. But every few seconds, her eyes flicked to the window too. As night fell, Daniel felt a familiar pressure in his skull, a pulsing, buzzing sensation like static coaxing itself into his thoughts. It had been years since he felt that. He used to call it the white noise. He used to think it was fear. But now it felt like a presence. Like someone whispering without sound. Like something was calling him outside. He resisted the urge. He stayed downstairs, pretending to read, pretending not to feel that presence pulling at him. Then, at 1:43 a.m., he heard the back door creak open. He froze. His heart pounded violently, pulsing in his throat. He turned the corner just in time to see his father stepping outside, barefoot, slowly walking toward the trees. Daniel ran after him, grabbing his arm, trying to stop him, but his father's eyes were empty, pupils blown wide, expressions slack and hollow. "He's waiting," his father murmured, voice distant. "For me? For all of us." Daniel dragged him back inside, locked the door, shoved a chair against it. His father didn't fight, didn't resist. He just stared blankly at the floor, hands trembling. When Daniel checked the backyard again, something stood at the edge of the tree line. This time, closer. Much closer. Tall. Too tall. Looming like a pillar of white cloth stretched over endless limbs. His faceless head tilted. Emotion so unnatural, so impossible it tore a gasp from Daniel's chest. He stepped back, breath stuttering, and slammed the blinds shut. But even behind the blinds, behind the glass, behind the locked doors, Daniel felt it watching him. Like it always watched him. Like it never stopped. Even after he grew up. Even after he moved away. Even after he forgot. The memories began returning on their own, triggered by the sight of that impossible figure. He remembered the whispers, the drawings, the nightmares, the kids at school who claimed they saw a tall man with no face standing at the forest's edge after sunset. He remembered one friend who went missing for 3 days, and how when they found him, he refused to speak again. He remembered the vow they made at 12 years old. Never go into the forest after dark. Never look directly at him. Never acknowledge his presence. And now, he had done all 3. The static in his mind grew louder that night. A piercing hiss, a hollow ringing, a whisper that felt like it came from inside his skull. "He is awake. He has seen you. He remembers you." Daniel pressed his hands against his ears, but the sound grew stronger. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from him, woven into his heartbeat, his breathing, his thoughts. He didn't sleep. The next morning, the footprints were closer, right beneath his bedroom window, right where he had seen him standing. Daniel knew he should leave, take his parents and get out, drive far from these woods, far from this presence that had latched onto him when he was a child and never truly let go. But something told him it was too late. He had looked directly at him, and once you see him, truly see him, he never leaves you alone again. Something was happening inside the house, too. Subtle things at first. His father wandering the halls at night. His mother sitting for hours without speaking. The lights flickering, but only in certain rooms. Rooms that faced the forest. Daniel began hearing footsteps behind him, soft and slow, but whenever he turned, the room was empty. His dreams were infected by tall shadows leaning over his bed. Every reflection in the house seemed slightly off, too stretched, too long, as if something stood just behind him, drifting in and out of sight. By the third night, he felt the presence inside the walls, inside the house, inside him. And then, at exactly 3:11 a.m., he woke up to the sound of his mother screaming. The next morning did nothing to clear the heaviness pressing against Emily's chest. She had barely slept, and when she did, it wasn't real rest, just thin layers of unconsciousness that broke every few minutes with the sensation that someone was standing beside her bed. Every time she opened her eyes, the room was empty. Still, the feeling lingered, crawling beneath her skin like a cold parasite. She skipped school. Her parents didn't argue. They assumed it was anxiety from the move or just exhaustion. But Emily knew it was something else, something that started in the woods, something that didn't leave the forest, but instead followed her home like a long shadow stretching itself across her life. She stayed in her room, curtains closed, sitting on the floor with her back pressed against the bed. The house felt wrong. Every creak made her flinch. Every whisper of movement pressed her deeper into that growing certainty that the invisible line between reality and nightmare had already been crossed, and she hadn't even noticed when.
By noon, she forced herself to stand. The air in her room felt heavy, humid almost, like she was breathing inside someone else's lungs. She tried to push the thought away, but it clung to her mind like damp cloth. The first thing she noticed when she opened her bedroom door was the hallway. It was darker than it should have been. The blinds downstairs were open. She knew because she had heard her mother opening them earlier, but somehow the sunlight didn't reach the top of the staircase. A faint gray haze filled the space instead, like the kind of dimness you see underwater. Emily stepped forward slowly, unsure if she was imagining it. The moment her foot touched the hallway floorboards, a sharp electric cold shot up her leg. She jumped back, gasping. The cold disappeared. She tried again. Another step. Again the cold, this time spreading faster, up both legs and into her spine. She pulled back again. She kept her hand on the doorframe. She wasn't going crazy. She knew she wasn't. Something was different. Something was wrong. Then she felt it. A pulse. Not sound, not an object falling. A pulse inside her mind. A pressure, like fingers pressing gently against the inside of her skull. A quiet whisper, not in words, but in sensation, brushed the back of her thoughts. Come back. Emily froze. She didn't know how she understood it, but she did. It was a command, an invitation, a call. The woods. That whisper came from the same presence she had felt there. The tall shape behind the trees, the faceless silhouette. She squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head violently. "No," she muttered. "No, no, no, leave me alone." The pressure eased, but it didn't leave. It waited. Hours passed. Emily stayed in her room, hugging her knees, trying to block out the quiet hum in her mind, like a voice far away, too faint to understand, but too persistent to ignore. At some point, she must have drifted off into a shallow sleep. When she opened her eyes, her room was dark again. She checked her phone. Only 4:28 p.m. Sunset wasn't for hours. Her lights were still on, but her room was pitch black anyway. Emily's breath froze in her throat. The shadows weren't normal. They were thick, heavy. They looked like they had weight, like they were made of fabric instead of absence. The air felt suffocating, pressing against her from all directions. She stood slowly, reaching toward the lamp on her nightstand. Her hand never touched it, because something else moved first. A shift in the darkness, subtle, wide, too tall to be human. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard it hurt. Something was in the room. Something towering. Something waiting. Her panic exploded like fire through her veins. She fumbled toward the door, fingers shaking so violently she could barely grasp the knob. She yanked it open, bolted into the hallway, and gasped in relief when the light hit her skin. Real light, warm, natural. The darkness behind her stayed inside the room. She slammed the door shut. She stood there with her back pressed to the wood, tears blurring her vision. She didn't dare open the door again, not to check, not to convince herself she was mistaken. She wasn't mistaken. She wasn't imagining anything. He was here. That night she slept in her parents' room. She didn't explain why, just said she felt sick, dizzy, like she didn't trust herself alone. Her parents worried, but they accepted it. At 2 a.m., Emily woke to silence. A strange kind of silence. Not peaceful, empty. The kind of silence that makes sound feel impossible. She looked at her parents, both asleep beside her, breathing softly. Then she noticed something else. The window. The curtain, which she distinctly remembered being fully closed, now hung slightly open, just an inch, but enough to see outside. Enough to see him. The tall shape stood perfectly still at the tree line, so still that for a moment she wondered if it was a tree. But then her vision adjusted. Trees didn't lean forward. Trees didn't bend, silently, as if acknowledging you. Trees didn't have arms that dangled too long, straight as ropes. Emily clapped a hand over her mouth to stop a scream. Her body trembled violently, so badly the mattress shook. She wanted to wake her parents. She wanted to run far from this place. But she couldn't move, because something else happened. A flicker. Not outside. Inside. Her vision dimmed for a moment, like someone had lowered the brightness of the world. And in that flicker, for a split second, she saw something impossible. Her parents, sitting upright, but their eyes were black. Not pupils, completely black, like ink filling the entire socket. She blinked. Another flicker. Her parents were sleeping again, breathing normally. The world returned to normal brightness. Emily's entire body locked up. She didn't know what was real anymore, what was hallucination, what was intrusion. Whatever was happening wasn't just haunting her, it was invading her perception itself. She curled into a tight ball, squeezing her eyes shut. Somewhere deep in the silence, she felt it again. Not words, not a voice, a presence. Not outside the house, inside her mind. Closer, stronger, like it had settled into the empty spaces between her thoughts. The woods are waiting. Emily forced herself not to cry. The next morning, her parents insisted she see a doctor. They thought she was suffering from extreme anxiety or maybe some kind of trauma. Emily wanted to explain, to tell them about the visions, the darkness, the figure lurking behind the trees, but she couldn't. Every time she tried to speak about him, her throat closed. Her mind froze. It felt like invisible fingers tightening around her thoughts, strangling the words before they could leave her mouth. By the time they arrived at the clinic, she felt sick, lightheaded, nauseous, her skin constricting around her bones. When the doctor asked what was wrong, Emily stared blankly, unable to form a single meaningful answer. Her parents answered for her. The doctor examined her, asked questions, pressed gently on her wrists and forehead. At the end, he gave a sympathetic smile and said it was exhaustion, stress, maybe even sleep deprivation. He prescribed rest. Rest. The word felt cruel. How could she rest when something watched her even in dreams? On the drive home, she stared out the window and froze. The forest passed by slowly. Too slowly. The car wasn't moving that fast, but the trees, they seemed to move at a different pace. The deeper ones didn't shift at all. They stayed in the same place no matter how far the car went. And between two of them, he stood there, motionless, perfectly aligned with the angle of the road, watching her. Emily dropped below the window frame, curling into herself. Her mother glanced back, confused. "Sweetie, are you dizzy again?" Emily didn't respond, because something cold touched her shoulder. She gasped and looked up, but no one was there. They arrived home just before sunset. Emily went straight to her room, not because she wanted to be alone, but because she didn't want her parents to see how terrified she really was. She closed the curtains tightly, taped them shut with whatever she could find. But even through the layers of cloth, she felt watched. When darkness finally settled, she didn't sleep. Instead, the house did. The silence deepened. The air thickened. The temperature dropped, slowly at first, then sharply, like someone had opened a door to winter. Emily hugged her knees, shivering. Then it happened. The humming returned. Not in her ears, in her bones. The entire house seemed to vibrate with a low, distant frequency, a pressure, a warning, or a summoning. The humming grew louder. The shadows in the corners of her room stretched, elongated, pulled themselves along the floor like spilled ink dragging toward her. Emily pressed herself against the headboard, her breath jagged. Then came the tapping, soft, deliberate. On the wall behind her, tap, tap, tap. Like someone tall was standing in the hallway, running one long finger across the place where her skull rested. Her heart pounded with such violent force she thought it might burst. The tapping stopped. Silence. Her breath hitched. Then, a whisper in her mind. Not words, a sensation. Come. Emily shook her head violently. No! Leave me alone! The pressure intensified, squeezing her skull like a vice. She screamed, dropping to her knees, hands clutching her head. In the darkness behind her, something unfolded. Slow, deliberate, quiet. She didn't need to look to know. She felt him. Tall, faceless, impossible. Close enough that she could feel the space bend around his presence. Her vision blurred, her thoughts scattered, reality thinned. And with the last remaining fragment of clarity she had left, she realized something horrifying. He wasn't trying to haunt her. He was preparing her for what waited in the woods, for what she had already been chosen for. Darkness consumed her vision. Not sleep, not a faint, something else. Something like doors closing inside her mind. When the world faded completely, she didn't fight it, because fighting was no longer possible. He was already inside, already in control, already pulling her back to where she didn't want to go. The woods, calling her home. The forest didn't feel like a place anymore. It felt like a condition, an illness I had stepped into, and now it clung to me like damp air and rotting soil. The deeper I walked, the more the trees began to blur together, trunks stretching taller, thinner, straighter, too straight. Some looked like human silhouettes frozen in bark. Others leaned like watchers whose patience had outlived centuries. But the real horror wasn't the trees. It was the feeling that I was no longer moving alone. I could hear the rhythm of footsteps behind me, never overlapping mine, never rushing ahead, simply following, matching my pace, matching my hesitation, matching my fear. Every time I turned around, the forest froze. No footsteps, no shape, no movement. Just the cold impression of something that had been standing there 1 second before, 1 breath earlier, 1 heartbeat ago. Something tall. Something still. Something waiting. I kept walking because the only other option was to collapse, and collapsing meant giving him a reason to reach me sooner. Maybe that was irrational. Maybe it had never mattered whether I ran or walked or crawled. Maybe he had already decided how this would end. The deeper I went, the more my memory smeared at the edges. I thought I entered the forest just hours before, but now it felt like days. The light hadn't changed, the air hadn't shifted, and my sense of direction blurred into a hopeless loop. I couldn't tell whether I was retracing old paths or carving new ones, but one thing stayed constant: the drawings. They clung to tree bark like scabs, paper nailed into wood with splinters, torn at the edges, smeared with charcoal lines that shook as if drawn by trembling hands. Every drawing showed the same tall, faceless figure, but each one was slightly different, like a progression. The first few depicted him far away, then closer, then behind a house, then reaching through a window, then inside a bedroom, then beside a child, then holding a child, then nothing.
blank paper. The last sheet had no drawing at all, just a deep indentation, as if a fingertip had pressed into the center of the page and dragged downward, like a mark left by something that didn't have fingerprints, only intent. I tried to drop the page, but it clung to my fingers, as if the paper itself refused to let go. When I finally tore it free, the skin on my fingertips stung like something had ripped away from me instead. My name whispered through the branches. At first I thought it was imagination, but imagination doesn't repeat itself in a deeper voice, or a higher one, or in the voice of someone you once loved. He was mimicking, testing, learning the sound of my fear. I walked faster, then slower, then stopped, because none of it mattered anymore. The footsteps continued at the same steady rhythm no matter what I did. When I froze, they stopped half a second later, as if the thing following me wasn't copying my movements, but predicting them, anticipating them. I forced myself forward until the forest opened into a strange clearing, the first open space I had seen in what felt like forever. In the middle of it stood a house, old, small, tilted slightly, like the earth had tried to swallow it and given up halfway. The windows were blackened from the inside, reflecting nothing. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges, and the porch boards groaned under the weight of wind alone. I didn't want to approach it. My body did it anyway. The closer I got, the colder the air became. Not like normal cold, this was the kind of cold that seemed to crawl across the bones, hollowing them out from the inside. My breath fogged in front of me despite the forest being warm minutes before. I stepped onto the porch. Something shifted inside the house, wood creaking under a weight that didn't bother hiding itself. I should have turned around. I should have run. But then I heard a voice from inside the house. A small voice. A child's voice. "Don't leave me." My heart cracked open. That voice wasn't a stranger's. It belonged to someone I knew, someone I had lost, someone whose absence had carved me hollow years ago. But that was impossible. That child was gone, buried, mourned, dead. And yet the voice, her voice, came again, trembling, desperate, terrified. "Please, don't leave me alone." Grief is a trap. Memory is a lure. He knew that. Slender Man didn't chase. He beckoned. I stepped inside. The door closed behind me with a softness that felt deliberate, almost gentle, like a hand settling onto my shoulders. The darkness inside wasn't empty. It had weight, like a thick curtain pressed against my eyes, smothering the edges of my vision. A faint glow flickered deeper in the house. A candle on a table. Beside the candle lay dozens of drawings, the same style as the ones outside, but older, more detailed, and more frantic. The creature drawn on them looked more alive than anything drawn by human hand should. On each page, its arms stretched farther, its posture shifted, its height increased. And on the last few, it wasn't just watching a child, it was holding one. The candle sputtered. Something moved behind me, slowly, deliberately, The boards groaned beneath the weight of something impossibly tall. A shape unfolded itself from the shadows, stretching upward, rising higher than the ceiling should physically allow. I didn't need to turn to know. He was here, closer than ever. His presence seeped into the room like an infection, bending reality around the shape of his impossibly long limbs, the blank smoothness where a face should be, the slight tilt of his head as if studying me with non-existent eyes. And then the child's voice came again, from behind him. "Help me." Only it wasn't the voice of the child I remembered. Not anymore. It mimicked her tone perfectly, but something was wrong. The cadence was off. The breath between words felt borrowed, artificial. A puppet imitation instead of a soul. He was using her voice to break me, to lead me closer, to finish what he had begun. I backed away. The door behind me vanished, simply gone, replaced by the same endless forest painted onto the walls in charcoal strokes. The house was no longer a house, the floor no longer wood, the ceiling no longer real. This place belonged to him. He stepped forward, his movements silent, fluid, impossible. His limbs bent without joints, folding and unfolding like ribbons of shadow. Every step he took made the room shrink, squeezing the air, crushing the hope out of my lungs. The candle went out. Darkness swallowed everything. But I still saw him. Not with my eyes, with my fear. He leaned down, so close I could feel the cold radiating from his empty face. A numbness crawled up my spine as his presence pressed against my mind. Not speaking, not whispering, just pushing, invading, claiming. A thin tendril of shadow slid across the floor and wrapped around my ankle. Then another, and another, pulling me toward him, pulling me into him. The last thing I heard wasn't my own scream. It was my name, spoken in the voice of the child I had lost, perfectly imitated one last time. A final, cruel comfort. It's okay now. You're coming with us. Darkness swallowed everything. And this time, it didn't give anything back.